6 ways SavvyCal can help your podcast scheduling. I recommend a lot of free tools on this channel. This one is not free, sadly, but I think is well worth the money when it comes to scheduling podcast episodes in between maybe your busy work day, your lifestyle, depending on what you're doing with your podcast. If it's part of your day job, if it's part of your brand, you're probably doing a million other things like the rest of us. And the worst thing that you can do is find yourself doing a podcast episode smack dab in the middle of a chaotic day. And a tool like SavvyCal can really streamline this for you and make it even better, especially if you have a team of people that you work with. But let's just take a look at the pricing just so I can show you that. The plan is $12 a user per month. I think it's well worth the price for the features that you'll get today. Let's dive into the reason number 1 that I recommend this tool. Having recently switched from one of its competitors because of a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today and a whole bunch more. Number 1, multiple links for multiple calendars. So one of the things that I switched to is I run a bunch of podcasts. I run the podcast for Castos audience. I have a Matt Report podcast. I have South Coast FM podcast, and I have another podcast coming. And they're all linked to 4 different calendars. And SavvyCal is able to take those 4 different calendars, smash them together, and then when I send somebody a link to book a time for the respective podcast, it'll look at the whole mix of availability I have and say, yeah, Matt can do a podcast at this time. So the multiple calendars with multiple links works fantastically. I can send somebody a link for the Matt Report podcast. I can send somebody a link for the South Coast FM podcast. And it's just that little touch, that little nuance that says, I have a unique link for this show. Here's how we're going, this is part of my brand. And it all talks to each other in the background. It's perfect for that. But the other thing that I moved to, and the reason why I like multiple links, is that I moved to a process of spending, I shouldn't say much more time, spending time doing a pre-interview before I actually do a podcast interview. So I'll send somebody a link that is for a 15-minute calendar booking, which is just me getting to know them if I don't already know them, finding the thread of story that we'll talk about in the actual podcast, and then, just spending that time building rapport. And then after that's over, I send them another SavvyCal link for the actual interview. Now, you might think sending all these links is crazy, but I'll show you in a moment why it all makes sense. So multiple calendars, multiple links for that specific situation. And I do that. Let's go into the edit of this link. And you can see right here, this is a 15-minute duration meeting. And I can send this out, and people can find 15-minute slots and book 15-minute slots with you on this 15-minute duration. If I wanted to add another one, I could either just duplicate this, and it's just going to duplicate it. And maybe I'll call it interview with Matt. So instead of chat with Matt, we'll call it the interview with Matt. And maybe the interview will make that one 45 minutes. Okay, that one will definitely be 45 minutes long. It's the podcast interview. We know we might even need an hour, right? Who knows? So we'll hit back on that. So you can see that we get 2 individual links here, and these links you can customize. So what I can do is say, here's that pre-interview, here's the interview. But what I'd like to do, and this is the next reason, this is reason number 2, defining limitations with these links. So I can go and hit edit, go into settings, and I can say limit scheduling frequency, add a limit to whatever I want. And what I do for pre-interviews is I'll do 3 pre-interviews because I have 3 different podcasts, 3 pre-interviews per week. So that means that in any given week, I could have 3 pre-interviews that I'm talking to people, and they're just 15 minutes. So you add that up, it's 45 minutes. But on my podcast interview, if I go back and I edit the longer one here, the 45 minutes, I can set up a limited, what I do set up is a frequency limit of 1 per week. So I only want to schedule 1 podcast per week. I don't know about you, but that's 1 per podcast. So that could be 3 podcast interviews in a week. Even if you have just 1 podcast and you have multiple podcast interviews in a week and you're just a weekly show, it can really start to add up. It can start a back catalog that gets out of date. It gets really hectic, really stressful. And this is amazing. These limiting of the schedule or limit schedule frequency can really help give you some breathing room. And speaking of breathing room, you can actually buffer these. So at the top of this, I was saying, like, you can find yourself in a busy work week and suddenly you're doing a podcast interview, in between like two stressful meetings, like an RFP meeting or like a sales pitch meeting. And all of a sudden in the middle of this, somebody booked a podcast interview. Well, you can schedule these buffers, before and after, right? So you can at least say, this podcast interview can't happen 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after another event. Like, it has to be an hour apart. So like when somebody goes to book the show, if there's not an hour gap on both sides of it, they can't book a show. And this little thing can really save you mentally as a podcast creator, especially if you're doing an interview show. So defining limitations. I love SavvyCal because of that. Next up, you can set up questions to intake before these meetings. So I'll just scroll up a little bit. If I go to the questions, I can type in questions that I want people to answer before the meeting starts. So if you're a popular podcast, you get people knocking on your door saying, "Hey, can I be on your show?" You can either filter it through there or have these questions available. So as they book, what is your, what's the best story you think you can tell to my audience? Or what is your background in this particular market? Like, gather some of that information first. So in that 15 minutes that you have, that tight 15 minutes that you have, you've already answered this question. You don't have to ask it and spend time in that pre-interview. You get the information you need and move on. So I love that. I love being able to gather that information, especially from people that you don't know too well who are asking to be on the show. Next up, post-confirmation behavior. And if we scroll down here, after somebody books a time with you, you can redirect them to another piece of content. So maybe you want to send them a link to your about page. Maybe they don't know who you are either, right? Maybe they're knocking on the door, just sort of like doing the podcast marathon, trying to get the word out. And once they confirm, you send them to an about page. Or you send them to a technical readiness document, right? Like, this is what I need you to prepare for to be on the show. Good lighting, good video, good audio, quiet setting. Here's a summary of my audience. Like, being able to send people and automate that process. Again, it sounds like, why don't you just send them an email with that stuff? Yeah, you could. But that's a few minutes out of your time to do that. Over the course of a year of doing 100 episodes or more, you're saving hours of time. So being able to send that post-confirmation behavior URL is fantastic. Next up, the next reason number 5, I think it's reason number 5, is you can embed this on your website. So you can grab the little snippet of code and put this on your website. So again, just a nice little touch to have, yourpodcastwebsite.com/calendar. So maybe you have your calendar open to people and you want to be able to just mention this on shows and say, hey, if you ever want to book a show to be on, or book a time to be on our show, go to website.com/calendar, and then you'll have the SavvyCal widget for somebody to book a time with you there. Instead of giving them a dedicated SavvyCal link, maybe you want to change that link later on, in the future. If it's just your website's link, not only is it nice because it's branded to you, but if you ever wanted to swap that out with a different calendar, change things around a bit, it's nice to just use your website within that context. The other nice thing that I like about SavvyCal is I don't have anything up right now because it's just a test account, but I can see all of the upcoming interviews. So yeah, you can do that too when you look in your calendar. You can see like all the schedules, but I use SavvyCal specifically for my podcasting stuff, and with so many podcasts, I can get a bird's eye view of all the upcoming guests or pre-interviews that I'm going to have to do. Just gives me a nice place to kind of look at it and just mentally focus on the podcast events that are coming up. Plus, if you share this with a marketing team or podcast editor, something like that, them being able to see sort of the pipeline of podcast coming up has a pretty big advantage. I know I said 6 at the top of the video. I meant to say 7. One of the other things that I like about SavvyCal, which I know will probably be enhanced over time, is the integrations and where it works with other platforms. So in individual links, I can go and I can add these conferencing tools to places like Zoom, which you see is not connected yet because I didn't connect a Zoom account to it, to Google Meet, Whereby, or custom URL. So maybe you're doing a live stream with something like StreamYard, and it's always the same StreamYard link, or Squadcast reusable link, something like that. You can always link it in right here. But if you have a Zoom account, where I know a lot of people record podcasts these days, it'll automatically create the Zoom room for you. It'll set that all up for you just by booking the time, and it's always a unique one, so it's not the same one that somebody's just going to pop into, randomly. So those integrations are really great, and I'm sure it's going to get even better over time. That's SavvyCal. That's 7 ways that I use and really enjoy using SavvyCal, like things that really make the boring, difficult task of scheduling a podcast, going back and forth with picking the right times, automating it, and just streamlining my process a whole heck of a lot better. SavvyCal.com. If you like today's video, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you want more stuff about podcasting, content marketing, creation, all of this fun stuff, academy.castos.com. If you want to join the Castos Academy to learn how to become a better podcaster completely free, check it out, academy.castos.com. We'll see you in the next video.